Okay, so if you haven't looked already, the resources page on the Columbia website, there's a tab over here called GIS. And this is actually really helpful. In the how-to section, there's a number, there's a few tutorials, and they're all pretty straightforward. And they're really easy to follow. So if you find yourself needing to do any of these things, look here. Also, there's a tab called Data, and this directs you to the X Drive, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, but the Columbia, their Spatial Information Design Lab keeps a collection of a lot of GIS on file. And a lot of this is the kind of open source stuff that we can download from the government anyway, but some of it is actually really helpful because a lot of data you have to pay for, and so the university will pay for, and this is made accessible to us here. One thing to note is, if it's something that is available online, it might not be up to date on the X Drive, and for your maps, you're going to want them to be as current as possible. And then also at the bottom of this page is a list of the most common places where you can download data. The thing to note about GIS data is that there isn't one set of data for any particular thing. Basically, just certain companies or certain institutions or groups of people will collect data, and so your data will only be as accurate as that individual source is. Also, there's a tips and tricks. And this section more or less just tells you that ArcGIS uses a lot of memory and fails a lot, so be prepared for that. And other couple things to note, though, is that you have to make sure that in all of your file names that there are no spaces ever and no periods. And so not only in the file names, but anywhere along the path. So none of the folder names can have spaces in them either. And also try to avoid long names for files. Although it's a happy medium between avoiding long names for files and then also not burying them in folder after folder. So you have to be really conscious of this kind of thing because it'll also cause GIS to crash or errors in data. Okay, so you're going to want to open. Unfortunately, we can't do this on one of the network computers. This is probably what you guys will be using when you're using GIS, but you're going to want to find GIS in the program tab. And it's going to be under ArcGIS, and the program is called ArcMap, which is already opened. And the thing you're going to want to have open pretty much all the time is ArcCatalog. ArcMap is where you'll be doing all of your mapping, and ArcCatalog is essentially just a Windows Explorer. You'll see that with shapefiles, I'll open a folder for you, that one individual shapefile is actually a number of files, often up to 9. So this is considered one shapefile, but all of these things need to be there in order for it to work. And so when you're copying things around, it could be pretty easy to miss one of these individual files. But if you do it in ArcCatalog, it kind of combines it into one package. Let's see. So where would the desktop be on this, Kyle?
Go to C, Documents and Settings. Oh no, Users, sorry. Kai Hoven, Desktop.
Okay, so now we can see that in this folder, it's actually just one file. And so when you're copying things around and moving things around, you're going to want to do that in ArcCatalog. And that's basically what you're going to use it for. Another thing to note, so because we're not connected to the server, I can't take you to the X Drive, so I just copied a few of the shapefiles onto this computer. But some of the things that you're going to want from the X Drive, let's see, there's kind of, here we go. we're going to do New York, so everything's going to be inside here. And there's actually quite a bit in there that you'll find pretty helpful. So I would just tool around and see if you want to map any of that. But for the base files, some of the ones that I would recommend, the main one would be the Pluto files. And these are files that you're going to get from the Department of Planning. And this is based on tax blocks. And it will tell you quite a bit of information about each block, including how much residential square footage is built in each tax block versus the amount of actual building that has actually been built, and who the owner of the buildings are, and whatnot. So you're going to want to get that file, and that's located at, I'll tell you right now, so you might want to write this down. It's on the X drive in the New York City folder. It's under base data. And under base data, there's another folder called lots. And then in that folder, there's a folder called Pluto. And then inside Pluto, there'll be Pluto for 2006 through 10. The only reason I have 2009 on here right now is because 2010 yesterday was like being occupied by somebody else, and I couldn't copy it. And then another thing that you might want to grab is this NYC map, which is basically just a base set of files that you're going to want for geography. And that is under, again, New York City base data, and then NYC map. And then again, you'll have a series of folders for different dates. And 2007 is the most recent for this kind of data. At least on the X drive, you might want to look and see if there are more recent files as well. But you can kind of determine what is most important to be the most recent. Things like hydrology might not need to be updated every year versus things like the Pluto data. Okay, so in ArcGIS, this over here is called your table of contents, and this is where all your layers will be. There are a couple other things. On your computers in Studio, there's going to be like a whole bunch of toolbars open up here. But these are kind of the basic ones. This one is called the toolbox. And it always takes a little bit of time to open. But in toolbox, there'll be like a whole series of more or less functions. And they're basically just like package scripts that you would run. Some of those things are quite sophisticated. And then there's also... let's see. This is if you were to press on this button right here, you would actually toggle Arc Catalog, which is already open, and then this one is the command line. There are ways to script in ArcGIS. I just don't know how to do that. Okay. So to add files, you can do it two ways. You can click on this this plus sign, which is Add Data, or you can right-click in the table of contents. How do you right-click? Okay. Well, you can, and then you can add data this way. So something that you're going to notice, it's not happening on this computer, but it happens on pretty much all of the computers at school, is that when you go in here and you're trying to find the folder that you saved all your info in, it's only going to register like one folder in here, and it's going to be some like obscure GIS folder. And so what you'll have to do is you have to click on Connect to Folder, and then you'll have to actually manually make a connection to wherever the folder is on your computer. I'm going to do it right now. And then once you do it once, then it will always be there. Okay, so we're going to add the Pluto data, and it's separated by each borough. So you'll see you can do all of them if you want. We have to kind of decide as a studio what the extents of your map will be. You might decide that it needs to be all 5 boroughs. Maybe it's only like Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan. Maybe it's like all 5 counties that the city is in. So you have to decide like how big this needs to be. So if you add Manhattan, Pluto, it shows up. I'll add a couple others. I'm not going to add them all because there's quite a bit of data in these shape files, and so it makes your computer kind of slow. So that even when you add them, you probably just want to turn them off. Okay, and then I'm just going to add the water. The only reason I'm adding the water is because if you... Do you have a mouse for this? You're going to want to use a mouse. But so if you noticed that the edges of the Pluto data are, are actually beyond the geography of the water, because a lot of this stuff is still, it's mapped into the water as well. You'll find that happens with like all the census data and a lot of the other block data. And so you more or less want it to actually look as if it's geographically like the city of New York. So what I would do is just like turn the water on and turn it white. And the way to do that is to double click on this color bar, and you'll just get this symbol selector. And in here you can choose a variety of different ways to visualize. If you click here, then you have this like basic set of colors, but you can also go to more colors, and you have RGB, CMYK, HSV. My recommendation is to get, I know like our intuition is to get the maps out of GIS as soon as possible into Illustrator because we're comfortable there, but you really should try to get your maps looking as close to the way that you want them to in GIS before Illustrator, because it'll be much easier to change things. So if we make this white and we turn off the outline, then it kind of disappears. Another thing, let's see if so if you go into each of these, if you right click on them, you have a whole series of options, and you can go down to the properties. You can also do this by just double clicking on it. And in here, the tab that you're going to want to use is called Symbology. And this is where you also, again, choose the colors and figure out how to visualize things. Because this is a shape file that's a polygon, we're going to deal with fills instead of what you might use, symbols or something else for other kinds of dot shape files. And then in Symbology, you want to go to Quantities. And then it automatically highlights its graduated colors. And so once you're in here, you can choose the value in which you want it to actually visualize. So in the Pluto data, you have all of these different things that you can access. So if you want to know just the amount of, let's see, what do you want to know? Commercial area. Okay, and this will happen on your computers and studios as well. It says maximum sample size reached, not all records are being used. So click OK, and then in this button over here where it says classify, click on classify, and then hit sampling. And it's defaulting to this 10,000 number. But if you look over here, you can see that you have more. So you want to set this to at least this number or higher. So I'm going to do 3 million. Let's see. Okay. And then just in case it didn't actually update that, you want to kind of refresh it. Okay, so you can see if we apply it, you'll have a gradient. it's in Brooklyn. So based on the values for the amount of commercial square footage in each of these tax blocks. So if we go back in here, we can also, so within the color ramp options, there's a bunch of kind of standard gradients. But you can also set them yourself by just setting one end of the gradient and then the other. So if you wanted this to be yellow and you wanted this to be another color, you can double click on it again and just choose a color. And then select the bottom of the gradient and then right click on it and go to ramp colors and it will ramp it. And you can do this from anywhere. So if you wanted it to change midway through, you would then click here and then you would click ramp again and it would sort of smooth it out. Another thing to know is that if you right click on the colors again, you can go to property selection for all symbols, and this is where you can at once remove the borders. Okay, so
I have a question.
yeah.
Do the layers work in the same way as in Illustrator? So
Yeah.
the water, it looks like that because it's the top
It's the
layer?
top. Right, so the layers are exactly the same as Rhino and Illustrator. It's based on a hierarchy, so the water is on top, and that's why it blocks out anything that's below it. There's nothing else is overlaying, so you can't see that. But yeah, you can move everything around by just clicking on it and dragging. Another thing to note in this box, you have 3 different ways of viewing this information. So the one that you're most often going to use is the display tab. I'm going to turn Brooklyn and Queens off and just do Manhattan for now because it's taking so long. So I'm going to do this really quick. So this will happen every time, apparently. So sampling, and this one has much more, so. I think the simpler the gradient, the better. For obvious reasons, easier to determine hot spots or highs or lows. Okay, so another way to view this information is the way we are right now in the display, and then you can also see it according to where it's located. So these are all actually more or less in the same folder, and then there's a selection tab, and this one will tell you what can actually be selected. So it's more or less like turning a layer on or off or locking it. So right now we can select any of these layers, but if we only wanted to be able to select the Manhattan Pluto map, then we would select all the others. But you have to, when you do that, you have to remember to turn them back on later because that will bite you in the ass. Okay. What else? Oh yeah, another thing. It's really hard to see this right now, so I'm going to change the gradient again. Okay, and another thing to note with, depending on the data that you're using, but especially with something like the square footage of commercial area in each tax block, you really don't care about the raw data. You really want to normalize it according to, like a total amount of square footage. And you'll end up doing this a lot for like population. You always want, for instance, when you're mapping race, you always want to normalize it according to total population, so you get a percentage of that total population that is white or non-white. So in this case, for commercial area, you would want to normalize it by the building area. So this is the percentage of what is actually built that is commercial. And when you do that, you can see in the way that it's showing up in this range down here that it's now a set of percentages. I would recommend, because of the way this works, you kind of want anything that's 0 to be its own category, because you don't really want to show it. You want to show this range from 0 to 0.69, but you don't want to show 0. So within classify, here you can actually, this is where you can use different methods for distributing the data. It defaults to natural breaks, which is sort of what I always use because I don't really know how these other things work. But you can see it, instead of, for whatever reason, natural breaks has been by statisticians proven to be like the most logical way to show a lot of different data, but certain data, it makes more sense to have like equal intervals or however you decide. So I would recommend in this case to you can increase the number of classes, so this would also change the resolution of your gradient, but I would increase it to 6. And then over here you can actually hand type in the values for which it reclassifies. So I would put 0, I would more or less even it out. Whoops. So from 0 to 1. And then press OK. And now you can see you have this value that's just 0 alone. And now if you go in here, you can actually just make it hollow and turn off the line color. And so now anything that's 0 will disappear. Which makes it a much more accurate map. Any questions so far? Is this all stuff you kind of knew already? Okay, well, that's good. Okay, so you can also, we turned the water to white before just so it would match the background, but you can also change the background. So if you wanted your water to be a color, you'll see that it's not like all of the water in the state, it's only the water in New York City. You can right-click on the viewport, and you can change the properties of the viewport pretty much the same ways that you can change the properties of a shapefile. So in that tab, you can go to, I have to remember what this is. In frame, you can change the background color. I can't remember which one I chose. And you can get the same more colors here as well. I think that's the same color. So you can see that right now, because we're only showing the Pluto data, the water shows through like where Central Park is. So we'll have to block out the entire boundary of the city, and actually I'm gonna do that in a minute. But another thing to note is that it depends on how you guys want to map this, but in the data viewport, you can also rotate. And so if, we tend to map Manhattan as if it were perfectly north. So if you want to show it that way, you can do that in this, in the general tab. You can just go to rotation, and I happen to know that it's 29 degrees. So that would make Manhattan, it would orient it north. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a few places to download some other data. We're going to download zoning data because I'm pretty sure that GIS wants you guys to cite your factories in places that are actually zoned for manufacturing. And so to do that, there's a couple places online. The main one would, because our site's in New York, if you type in NYC data mine, you can, the city has collected and continues to update a lot of the data for the city. So if you're here, you go to data sets, and then you're going to want geographic data, and this means that many of these already have shape files. So you wouldn't have to do what we'll be doing next week, where you'll be taking the raw data and then assigning them to a shape file yourself. And then within here, you can define a set of categories. If you go to business and economic, and then search, you'll see there's a variety of different things that you can choose from. If you expand, you can kind of tell, you can see a little bit more about what they are. One thing to really pay attention to is also the frequency. So some of these things are only updated as required, which might just be like 2 to 4 years. See, this one's a Pluto map from 2005, whereas we're mapping like 2010 and 2009 already. But the zoning data is also in here. And you want the zoning data that is an ESRI shapefile. This means that it will add in the same way that we've added all the other files. So the data will be associated with a polygon. And so you can download that here. And then I'll go ahead and do that. It will download a zip file, and then inside that file will be a folder. We'll have, the 8 different files that comprise a single shape file. Another thing we want, because of the way the map looks right now, how we can see the water below, we want to get the boundary files for the city. And this will just be like the basic shapes of all of the 5 boroughs. And that is in administrative and political boundaries. And then when you scroll down to borough and community districts, GIS boroughs, see, this one's only updated 2 to 4 times a year, which is actually quite often. But in other cases, if there are certain things that won't need to be updated quite as frequently. Okay, so when you download that, I've already done it, so you'll unzip it and you have a folder here. And you won't have this one, I made that one myself, and I'll show you to do that later, but you'll have all of these files, which will be the New York boundary files. So you add that data in the same way that you did already. It's always called NYBB. So if you see that in other cases, you might see some NYBBs on the X drive. I think some of them are corrupt. I tried to use them. But anyway, these ones are obviously more up to date. And so another thing to note, just because I'm doing it now, is that the zooming and panning in the viewport is slightly different. It's more or less like Google Earth, where in order to zoom in, you have to scroll towards you. In order to zoom out, you have to scroll in. So this is, again, we're going to want to move this shape to the bottom. And then you can visualize it however you want. I'm going to make the water white again because this blue is kind of crazy. Okay, so now we can clearly see the 5 boroughs, and then the Pluto data mapped according to commercial area, the percent of commercial area in each tax block. And we now want to add the zoning data. So we downloaded that already as well. When you download it, Let me show you another place where you can download the zoning data, actually. So you can download it the way that we did it already, but you can also go directly to the City of New York's Department of Planning. If you Google, let's see, what's it called? NYC, it's called Bites of the Big Apple, if you can remember that. And this is all the data that the Department of Planning collects. You can see this is where they also do the Pluto information, which is $300 per borough. So luckily Columbia purchased that. And then down here is also the GIS zoning, and so you can download the newest release. Another thing to note is that in this folder, so this is where you would download the actual data, and then in this, where if you click on the metadata, you can then know, you can use this to determine what each of the zoning classifications actually are. Let's see if I can figure this out. Okay, I think I figured out that you actually can't find that information there. You have to Google. You have to Google again. Let's see. NYC zoning districts. So when you go here, zoning reference. So in this viewport, you can actually learn quite a bit about zoning. You go into this tab, it's manufacturing districts, and it will tell you how to identify the districts. Basically, anything with an M in front of it is going to be manufacturing district. And then if you go in here, you can learn more about the specifics of what an M1 is. And these might be really helpful for you when you decide what kind of zoning districts you guys will need to locate your institutions. Okay, now going back to GIS. And then you add the zoning. And when you're in here, so there's a number of different files that come with it. And this is actually what's in the metadata on the Bites of the Big Apple website. But the zoning file is actually this one right here, NYZD for zoning district. And so you'll see when you go into the properties of the zoning district, it won't appear in the same way that the Pluto data appears, because you can't actually, there's nothing here to actually visualize in terms of a gradient, because it's actually categorical. And so because what you really want to do is just extract the manufacturing districts, if you right click on the layer, you can go to the attribute table, which is this open attribute table. And this is where you can see, this will basically is the equivalent of your Excel file, but this is where you can see all of the data that's associated with that shapefile. So if you sort according to zoning district, you can scroll down to the areas where they're manufacturing. And you can actually select the manufacturing districts by selecting the entire row and then shift selecting to the bottom of the M's. Use quite a bit. And then once you've done that, you can see that it's actually selected in the viewport all of the geography that's associated with that data. And if you right click on the layer, you can go to data, and then this is something you're going to do a lot. So you will go to data and export data, and here you want to make sure that you should have all features. It's going to export anything that's selected. And you want to save it as its own shapefile. This is how you make your own shapefiles also. I already saved this. I'll do it again, but you can name it however you want. In my manufact, and then press OK. It will always ask you if you want to add that new layer and say yes. And so now if we turn off the full zoning, sorry, I screwed that up. I need to delete that. So I right-clicked on the Pluto data and not the zoning data. So it just made an entirely new Pluto data set. So now we want to go to our catalog and delete that. Sorry. So it's really easy to delete it now because it's just one. Okay, so what you want to do again is go into the zoning, go to the attribute table. It's already sorted. Select all of the manufacturing districts which are still selected. And now, so the point here is to right-click on the right layer. Go to Data, Export, Data, and then now it will tell you that it's exporting only what is selected, the selected features. And this time, save it and name it whatever you think makes the most sense. Okay, and I did it much faster that time. Okay, so now when we turn off all the other data, now we have this one shapefile with only the manufacturing districts. So we might also decide that we only want to show the manufacturing districts in the Manhattan borough. We want to extract that data. So the way to do that is to do a clip. And so in order to do that, first we need to have the borough of Manhattan as its own entity. And so in order to select Manhattan, we have to go to Windows. Let's see. If you just right-click on the toolbar, then you can open up a variety of different toolboxes, and the one it's going to be open on all of your computers in Studio, but you need I've never had to open it before. Let's see. So generally there's a set of buttons up here that have a variety of different arrows, and these are your selection tools.
I think it might be advanced editing.
Advanced editing? No. What? Any other suggestions? Data frame? No. Okay, I have to Google this. I don't know why it's not showing up. Hopefully that toolbox exists on this version.
It I mean, I've seen it before, the different selections that one.
Seems like it would just be called selection toolbar.
This is 9.3.
So what we want is this.
Yeah.
And it has pan and zoom and...
What was it called, like navigation or something?
Let's see. I don't know, it doesn't look like it's here.
I know I've seen that before on my computer.
Okay.
Is it under editor?
Oh, try data frame tools. No.
Editor's open.
Yeah.
Maybe it's under... Sorry. No, that's already open. I mean... They obviously exist.
What about standard?
Tools are open. It seems like it should be called selection.
Yeah.
Did it say the name in that Google?
No. Turn, please. I think it's just always
Using
open. Toolbar.
Tool.
It says that it's open. I was hiding. Okay, well that was unnecessarily difficult. Editor is something slightly different. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Okay, so in order to select something, this is the button. This is the general arrow that we're kind of always using, and it doesn't really select anything. But in order to select a geometry, you need this one that has this little like envelope next to it with the cyan. And this is when also we want to make sure that we're not selecting anything else. So we go to selection. We turn off everything except for the NYBB. And we select Manhattan. And then we can turn everything else back on. And once we've done that, we can, again, right-click on NYBB, data, export, and then save it as its own shapefile. I already did it, so I'm not going to do it again, but you would just rename it, and then it would appear in your folder, and then it would give you the option to place it back in. I'm going to instead just add it. So now we have the Manhattan shapefile. We probably want to move it down again. And we don't even really need it to stay for as long as we need it for this one clip. So in order to perform a clip, you should open the ARC toolbox and go to the search tab and just type in clip. And it gives you two options. In the first one, you want to use the one that's an analysis tool. And you can double click on it here. And in this window, you just kind of answer these questions. You know that input, you want it to be the data from the zoning. And you want the clip feature to be the boundary of New York or Manhattan. And then again, it will extract that data and save it as another shape file. So you have to save it again.
Go to users.
Once you do it this first time, every time you make a clip, it will remember where your folder is. You might save it as MNZD. Okay, so now we're only looking at the zoning districts in Manhattan. We can get rid of this now. Really, even after having just done that, I realized that, well, now you know how to do a clip. What you really want to do is clip the manufacturing districts. Okay, but anyway, you get the point. Does anyone have any questions so far? So basically just showed you how to select something, make a clip, and export data and save it as its own shapefile.
When you're reading different data sets,
Yeah.
how do you ensure that the projections are the same or as close as possible?
Yeah, well, we can.
Is that projection like accurate?
This projection is accurate, but hold on, I'll go over that right now if you want. So the thing to note about projection, so projection and mapping in GIS is really complicated. I think it can in many ways become its own thesis, but we know that we have to use it, so we kind of have to just understand it at some capacity. But basically at the basic level is that because the Earth is round, all of this data in order to become a 2D image needs to be projected, and there are a variety of different ways of producing a projection. And so depending on what projection you use, you might have a completely distorted map. The point in projecting data is that you want it to be most accurate to the geography that you're actually mapping. And so there are two different ways of mapping data to a geography, and one of them is going to be the projection, and the other one is assigning an XY coordinate to the actual shapefile. Let me see. So if you go into Art Catalog, you can see that because we're downloading all of this data from the city of New York, they've already projected all of it, but you're going to come across data that hasn't been projected, and so you'll need to know how to do this. That's going to happen next week, so you'll see more obviously the problems that can come from that, but let's just go over it really quickly. If you right-click on, for instance, on the zoning data file, you go to Properties. This is an Art Catalog. This is just within the file system. You can go to this tab, which is XY coordinate system, And you can see, so there are these two different systems. There's a geographic coordinate system, and there's the projection. And the projection is the one that will affect the way that it looks as a map on your viewport. And so this is the most important for when you're combining data from different sources. You want to make sure that it's not distorted. And so whenever you say the word conformal in a projection, it means that it's preserving angle. So this is the most helpful for us when we're actually producing a map as a graphic. And also, the geographic coordinate system is associated with the actual shapefile. So data won't necessarily have this, but the projection is to the data, and the coordinate system is to the shapefile. And so this is based on where it's located in the world. It can get even specific down. Some states have actually calculated their own projections or coordinate systems, but in most cases, you're going to see this GCS, North American 1983. You're also going to see WGS 1984. Those are kind of the most common that we come across. Right now, everything is projected to these two values. If you right-click on the viewport and you go to data frame properties, you have the coordinate system tab here as well. And this is where you want to make sure that this data frame corresponds to the actual coordinate system of the data. So right now it's assigned to this custom one, which was more or less associated with the data when we imported it. And the custom one is exactly the same as the one that we just saw. It's Lambert, conformal, conic, and then North America 1983. You can change it. And again, so here's if you go into predefined, you have geographic systems and then projected coordinate systems here. Many times we often use world, and so this is where WGS 1984 is. There's a number of different ways of actually projecting this data. Let's see.
Do they have the Dymaxion now?
I don't know.
Fuller projection?
You might want to Google that and see what it's actually called. So then, but often you want to map it to like the state plane system. And then, so right now if we want to keep it conformal, that's just so that we can maintain some kind of, this is the way that we often see the map of New York. But if it were in a different projection system, it's not this rotation, it's actually this like skew in 3 dimensions. You'll see sometimes the entire state will be really squat and fat, but it will be completely accurate still. It's because it's just projected in a completely different system. If you start to make calculations in GIS in the data table, you want to make sure that your projection corresponds to whatever calculation you're producing, and you can just change it for the time being. We'll do this next week, but for instance, if you want to calculate area because you want to just decide what population density is, you have to change the projection first to a projection that conserves area instead of angle. Otherwise, your area calculations will be completely wrong. We'll do that again next week, though. But basically, the main 2 things to know is you can use our catalog to see what actual projections are assigned to the data, if any, and then you can assign them the projection in the data frame. Okay. Really quickly, I want to this is going to be helpful just to get you used to the interface for GIS. We're in what is more or less the equivalent of AutoCAD model space, but if you look down here, there's also this other layout view. It's the equivalent of paper space. And so you have this viewport, and you can resize it and you can move it around. You can change its scale here, but you can also zoom in and out. So if you use the mouse, it will zoom in and out with the page. But if you use these tools, it will zoom the actual viewport. And same with pan. If you use the tools in the toolbar, it will pan the data versus the way you would generally pan or zoom with a mouse.
So that is letter size?
That's letter size. So if you right click on the paper, you can go to page and print setup, and then you can change the size of the page. If you want 11 by 17 landscape, it's pretty straightforward. You can also have more than one viewport, so you can either just like copy this one by doing I don't know if this computer will let me. Okay, it's not copying it, but you could copy and paste it, I guess. It's not doing there it is. It was toggling like something in the Windows. It was a Windows Max confusion.
Yeah.
So you can have two, and when you produce another one, and you go back into the models, you can actually see it here. It now created two sets of layers. It won't add any data, it won't slow the file down, but you'll see like you can now turn off or turn on data in a different window. Something that's really important here is that you want to save your viewport, bookmark your viewports. So if you decide that this is the perfect scale, then select the viewport, go to bookmarks, and create one. And then you have to do it individually for the both of them.
Is that kind of like capturing a camera angle?
It's just like camera viewports in Rhino. Yeah, exactly. So now if I were to zoom in here on accident, or even if I happen to have one selected and I go back into model space and I start zooming it around, when I go back to paper space, it will maintain that aspect ratio or the scale. And so then you just have to, again, like, it's the same way. We know that there's that one here, and if you select on the viewport there, you have this bookmark here. Some of the things for the paper space that are helpful are the labels or the legend. You might not choose you want to actually like have the legend around, but it's pretty helpful to know. So I'm actually going to make this map the Pluto map instead. And then we'll select that viewport, insert legend, and then using these arrows, you just want to keep Pluto on this side. So move water back, move NYBB back, and then go to next. This will give you legend title, so you can name it whatever you want, like, what was it? Manhattan commercial space. And you can change the font, like, obviously you want to use Arial, always. And then, I would actually just kind of like zoom through all of this at first and then change it once you see what it looks like. And then, so here's your legend. If you double click on it, you can go back in and change other things. So we really don't want it to say like the name of the layer. So if you double click on here and you go to items, click on style, and go to properties, and then to general, and turn off show layer name and show heading, and now it will only show the label for each of the categories of data.
You can export it into Illustrator.
Is that text editable?
Yeah. It is. Sometimes, depending on the file format, it won't be like one full string of text and like each individual number its own string of text.
Just remind us, how do we bring up the drafting? What was it?
Yep, it's tiny. It's always tiny, but the one that looks like a little globe is like model space. And the one that looks like a little piece of paper is paper space.
In paperspace, how do you just scale
So this, it's this tab right
Okay.
here. So they have a few that are just already in here, but you can type it in as well. Yeah, if you want an actual scale. And then, so another thing to note about the legend is that you really don't want to show percentages like that. You don't need that many decimal points. So if you go back into the Pluto data and you go to properties, right click and format labels. And here you can change the number of decimal places. So just 2. And then you can insert a north arrow. There's some really amazing options here. I like this one. And it already knows what north is, so which is really nice because we rotated the viewport, it's orienting north in the correct location. You can also insert a scale bar, and there's a few set options. Okay, that's the paper space. That's your beautiful drawing. Let's see. Oh, okay.
Much.
Should we? Yeah, let's do it. There we go. Okay. Any questions so far? I think we're almost done. Actually, we're not. Yeah, we're almost done. Okay. So I just want to go. I only showed you how to do that one kind of selection. I want to show you that there are a couple other ways to do selections in GIS. I'm going to make this lighter because it's too dark. Okay. There's the identify tool, which looks like this. It's just an eye with a circle with an eye in it. And basically the way that it works is that it lets you zoom in and you can select any individual geometry and it will give you the data associated with that one block. Let's see. So you can see again, it'll tell you, what lot it is, what block it is, like all of this information that's associated with Pluto. It will even tell you who the owner is. So this one happens to be JP Morgan Chase. So that's just helpful. Another thing is, again, this is the selection tool. So the way that it's set up automatically is to just reselect every time you click. But you can change that by going to selection, interactive selection methods, and you can decide that every time you click you want it to add. And you can continue to do that. Also, if this version doesn't let you, but on your computers in Studio, there's a drop-down menu, and it will give you different ways of selecting. So this way is going to default on the rectangle. So it'll kind of like Illustrator and AutoCAD, it will select anything that's in the rectangle. But again, because everything can be selected, it's selecting the NYBB math as well. So we want to go into selection and turn everything off but Pluto. It won't do it. It doesn't recognize the shift. You have to use this interactive selection method. The envelope, what looks like an envelope but without an arrow, is the clear selection tool. And because you'll see, like, if you try to click off of what you've selected, it'll just continue to select more. So in order to clear the selection, you have to click this button. And then,
is there a way to subtract?
Yeah.
Like to deselect one element?
Yeah. So that's all in this interactive selective method. So when you click, you add to the current selection, or when you click, you remove from the current selection. Or you can only select from what is already currently selected. I don't really know how that would work. Okay. Let's see. There are a couple other ones that are really helpful. Oh yeah. So if you make a selection in the viewport and you go to the data table by right-clicking and then go to attribute table, it will have, wherever those boxes are that's selected, it will actually have them highlighted as well, so you can see they're kind of spread out. But you can also, at this button on the bottom, go to selected, and it will only show you the ones that are selected, which will be really convenient. So if you decided you only wanted to have those few blocks in their own shapefile, then you could then export this data now, or you could at least compare the data. Another thing in here is that you can also, this doesn't seem to have the option, but on your computers in Studio, you can zoom to the selection. So if you happen to have something selected and you're zoomed like further out, it would let you zoom closer. You can also do that outside of the data table by selecting something, right-clicking, and then zoom to selected features. Also, let's see. Okay, you can do something called select by location. So this might be, you'll have to decide. It might be easier to show you this with the zoning data. So when you go to selection, go to select by location, and you have to read these as kind of a sentence. So it says, I want to select features from New York manufacturing that, and then you have this series of qualifiers here, and you can say like that are completely within Manhattan BB. So now it's only selecting all of those shapefiles that are completely contained, like none of them are intersecting the boundary. So if you decided that you only want to find manufacturing zoning districts that are on the water, you could do this by selecting, again, select the feature from the manufacturing zoning shapefile that intersect with the water. And so now these are the only ones that happen to be on the water. You can also You can also draw. You would have to open the draw toolbar, just here. I don't see it though, so.
Things down the bottom.
Okay. Okay, there it is. So these are your kind of basic drawing functions, and you can choose the polygon, and you can just draw something like this. Double click to end it, but you can, if you wanted to do something where you knew that you want anything that's kind of within this area, you can, now that you've drawn that, with it selected, you can go to select by graphics. We have to make sure that the layer that you want the data to be selected is actually highlighted, and then do it again.
Is it drawing those shapes on a certain layer? Like, is it on the...
It's drawing them on whatever layer you are actually on. Let's see, did that not work? You can delete it too. Let's see, why won't that work? I can promise you that doing it exactly that way on your computers upstairs will work. Okay, here's why. Yeah. So now we want to just make sure that it's the zoning data that's selected. So select by graphic. Oh, I turned the wrong one on, didn't I?
I think it was still there.
Sorry.
It was still there.
Okay. So now it works. And it chooses anything that intersects that graphic. So to delete, this is another thing that will be really helpful for you. So to delete this, you actually have to right click and then delete it. If you decide that you love everything about this this zoning, this manufacturing zoning, but you really don't want that one shape there, instead of having to select all the things you want and then export it as its own shapefile, you can actually delete it, and that's when you use the editor. So you go to editor, make sure again that you're selecting the layer that you want to work on, and then you go to editor and you start editing. You want to choose the folder that is zoning. Okay. And once you've done that, you can actually hand select things, and you can delete them by right-clicking and deleting. One thing that I would recommend, though, instead of deleting right on the viewport, is to make sure that your attribute table is open, because a lot of times what happens is that certain geometries certain pieces of data have more than one piece of geometry that's associated with it. So if you delete one and not the other, then you have this kind of weird anomaly in your data. So in this case, there's only one. But you might come across one somewhere else where there's multiples associated with it. But once you know that you're deleting all of it, you can delete it from here as well. No, you can't hide it. You can, but in the same way that we've been doing. You wouldn't do that in the editor, so make sure that always to stop editing once you're done doing this. But to put it on its own layer would be to actually select it and then you would right-click on the layer and do it the way we've been doing it, data, export data, and you save it as its own shapefile.
But it's like just adding, it's copying it, it's not like moving it.
Exactly. It's not removing it, it's exporting the data and saving it individually. Let's see, I think there's a couple other things that will be helpful. So the zoning data is, we can't ramp it like we can the Pluto data in terms of producing a gradient, but what we can do is give it custom colors according to each of the different districts. So if you right-click on it and go to the properties, it's in the symbologies tab again, but because it's categorical data, we want to go to categories. And your only option really is zoning district. And at the bottom, click on add all values. And then you'll see that these are all of the different values that exist within that one field for zoning district. And in here you can then assign a different color value. There's also this color ramp, but I guess you'd have to select all of the properties for all symbols. So you change the color in the same way that we've been doing it so far. And so this is actually showing you the different zoning qualifications that are within the manufacturing qualification. Something else that might be helpful is we're almost done. In the attribute table, you can actually produce calculations here as well.
Does anybody have a Mac charger down here?
Oh, maybe it's it lasted this long.
No, I'll get mine open.
We're almost done, so we might be able to do this, actually. Okay, so I already did this, but if you wanted to so this available FAR column doesn't actually exist. I created that yesterday. But if you wanted to, you can create a set of, you can use the data table as if it were an Excel sheet. Although, to be honest, if you have the data in an Excel sheet before you import it, pretty much any kind of calculation should happen there. But so if you, it looks slightly different than what you will see in Studio. If you go to Options, go to Add Field, and name it, I'm going to do the FAR one again just because it's really easy. And change it to a double. I'm not really sure why, I just know that it's assigning more information to the data. But yeah, so you'll come across this a lot. You would really want to name it Avail FAR, but I already did it, so just take whatever it gives you. And then when you select the column, you can go to Field Calculator. And then everything in this, the fields correspond to the columns, so everything in this box will be the different categories of data. So you want to do, in order to determine available FAR, you would be subtracting built FAR from maximum allowable. So you would double click on maximum allowable, hit subtract, and then double click on FAR, or built FAR. And then it will calculate it. And then you would have a new field for which you could graph. So you'll see, like, when you start downloading data, specifically like some of the more sophisticated stuff off the internet, it's not going to be, like, you want to be able to create these calculations because, for one, you want to normalize as much as possible, and also because you're given so much data, specifically in the Pluto, that you need to figure out what is the most applicable to your map. And then there's a couple of things I want to show you before this dies. Just to export to Illustrator, you can do it from this view or in the paper view.
Sorry.
And it's really straightforward. It's just file. It's like the way we always would do it. Export map. And you can export PDF, Illustrator, EPS, and then a series of images. One thing to note, this, I don't know why, I just know this from observation, that if you have a map that has quite a bit of data, and you're even zoomed out as far as we are in the Manhattan one here, if you save it as an EPS or an Illustrator file, when you open it in Illustrator, you'll notice that lines that should be straight will have a kind of resolution associated with it, so they'll become jagged. It's actually associating the resolution of the viewport. I don't know any way to avoid that. But the main way would be to actually export DWGs. So to do that, you have to use the toolbox. And you can go to the main tab and click on Favorites. And then there's this tab called Conversion Tools. And then there's the tab that's to CAD, and then Export to CAD. When you double click on that, it will again give you the option. So which layers do you want to map? And you can choose more than one, so you can choose all of them if you wanted. I would recommend being really strategic about which ones you choose at a time, because it could take forever, it could crash. The export to CAD feature is pretty labor intensive or memory intensive. But at the same time, if you decide that you split your exports on maybe like 3 different exports, just make sure that you keep like one variable the same, so that you have something to line them up when you overlay them in Illustrator. I'm not going to do that now. There's another one I think that you guys want to use. You can also, in the data table you can export to DBF, which you can import in Excel. So if you export here, your only option is DBF. So you would just rename it, save it somewhere, and then you could import this entire table into Excel. So if you determine that you download something and you really need to do a lot of calculations, the best way to do it would be export to DBF, open it in Excel and do all of them there, and then import it back into GIS. Another one is the export to KML, which will directly link you to Google Earth. So if you right click and open the tab or the toolbar that's so this, I think maybe you have to download it as a plugin. So the computers upstairs, this is really easy. On the computers upstairs, when you right click on the toolbar, there'll be one called Export to KML. And the toolbar will open, and it's literally one button with a Google Earth image on it. And you click on that, and you have like 3 different options. But one of them is a height option. So if your data has a height field associated with it, which it would be, none of this data does, but if you had a height, it would be in the it would actually have its own column in the field, in the attribute table. So it would just be like this height field. So it asks you what would you like to link to height, and then you would choose the height field. And then it would actually link you directly to Google Earth after that, as long as Google Earth is on your computer. Otherwise, you could just import a KML to Google Earth when you open it. I think that's probably enough. Yeah.
Do you have any compatibility between the file 9.3 and the school?
No, I've never had any issues.
So you can I can work on one file on 1.3 and then
Let's see. I have a file here. You might have to save down. I've never had to go down. I've opened older files in the newer version, and it wasn't an issue. I've been, let's see if this opens. Yeah. So this was, so I wonder if, yeah, let's see if this one has it. File, save as. I don't know.
'Cause I don't
Let me
know-
look into it.
I don't know what disease has it in mind, as far as the collaboration.
Yeah.
aspect, But if we're working, like, if some people are working on like one version and the others are working on the other version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should set up some kind of baseline so that we can work.
Okay, let me figure that out. Hopefully it will work.
Yeah. The other question I had was when you bring in, whether it's as a DOVG or as the AI file, when you bring in the map into Illustrator, what layers will bring over? Will an Illustrator bring-
Illustrator files will consolidate everything into one layer, and at least with the newest version of GIS, it will give you each of your layers. It will maintain your layer organization, which is awesome. You also don't have as many issues with resolution. It just takes a lot longer, and it's almost like a rendering time to export a DWG, just because there's so much information embedded into each of those lines. Yeah. So I mean, this seems pretty straightforward. Okay, I think we're done.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, I can